Keith Tebow, FRCmedia, thank you for joining us. It's been a while since we've caught up with things that have been happening on Beacon Hill from the State House, and we're pleased to be joined today by State Senator Michael Rodrigues. Senator, how are you? Welcome back.
Thank you. Good morning to you, and good morning and hello to all your visitors and your guests. It's great to be back. It's great to be home.
I was just going to say that last time we talked, we were in your office in Boston. Now you're home. Yep. I mean, there's still a lot of work going on at the State House. So what's the current status of work at the Senate? And you're at home, but there's still some work going on behind the scenes, correct?
Absolutely. Well, we had a long 5 months, and I think we talked a lot about that last time we were together. But right now, the legislature, both House and Senate, voted to suspend the rules to allow us to continue to meet in formal session beyond July 31st. We were scheduled to end formal session on the 31st of July during the even number of years, during the election years, to prevent any lame duck sessions from happening. However, with the pandemic, there's just still so much unfinished business, most namely the state budget. We passed House and Senate, and the governor is about to sign a 3-month budget, an interim budget that gets us through the end of October. It allows us to pay the bills and keep the lights on as they will, to ensure that, everyone at, BCC and, all of our state agencies and departments continue to get paid while they're working during these next 3 months. But this allows us, this 3-month interim budget allows us to get some better level of certainty, because right now we have no levels of certainty around 3 very important things that is necessary for us to put together a responsible budget. We are uncertain on what we are going to be getting in the terms of federal aid. What is Congress going to send the states to help them with the revenue holes caused by the COVID-19 pandemic? We know that the U.S. House of Representatives passed something called the HEROES Act that actually contained quite a bit of money for states and local communities, by the way. And the Senate passed something called the HEALS Act that had no money at all for states and local communities. So we hope that in the terms of compromise, that they end somewhere in the middle, so that we get some sort of significant help from our feds in balancing the state budget. So that's one thing that we're uncertain about. The second thing we're uncertain about is the virus. What's going to happen with the virus? I mean, we had thought a couple months ago that the virus would be in a lull right now, and our concern would be whether or not the virus would reemerge when flu season comes on in the winter. But as we've seen, the virus really hasn't gone away. And there are hot spots and pockets, certainly throughout this country. But even we've seen numbers tick up in the state of Massachusetts, and we've been so careful, much more so than states like Florida and Arizona and South Carolina, where we've seen the numbers spike. So uncertainty around federal money, uncertainty around the virus. And third, and just as importantly, is uncertainty around the economy. We've seen the economy bounce back a little bit as we've entered into phase 3 of reopening. That prior jobs and businesses that were deemed non-essential have been allowed to reopen, and they are hiring people back. But we still have over 1 million people in Massachusetts unemployed. And with this virus not going away, we have no certainty on how quickly this economy is going to rebound. So hopefully by the end of October, we will have greater sense of certainty on those 3 issues, and we can put a budget together.
Yeah, I think one of the things that was also important that was announced in the past week or so was a little more certainty for cities and towns. Cities like Fall River, they're working on a month-to-month budget and an appropriation. City of Fall River's paid through the month of August. And it was announced that both the governors and you and other leaders in the legislature have announced that, local aid going to cities and towns for schools and government services will be level funded for this year. So I guess the question I have is, how can you make that guarantee And is there a way that that could change either way, up or down?
Good question. And there are really no guarantees in this world, as you know, Keith, but we made a commitment. We in the Senate, our colleagues in the House of Representatives, and the governor all made a commitment. We knew that we could not leave on July 31st, even though we are still in session, but we're taking it easy. We could not enact a 3-month interim budget without some level of certainty for our local communities. So we made a commitment to level fund what's known as UGA, or Unrestricted General Government Aid. That's a check that the state cuts right to our municipalities for their general use. In the city of Fall River, it's about $23 million. And we committed to level fund plus inflation for Chapter 70, which is the amount of money that the states provide our cities and towns to provide for K through 12 education. That's in a neighborhood of about $140 million for the city of Fall River. How did we do that? We did that by making it very clear that those two accounts are our priorities. Helping our local municipalities, that it's where the rubber meets the road, and it's where most of our citizens get their day-to-day government services, be they education, be they public safety, police and fire, be they highway and public works, maintaining our roads and bridges, local boards of health that really, really overburdened during this pandemic. We made a commitment that that's our priority, and we're going to budget around that. Now, come October, when we go back to the budget table, if we receive a significant amount of federal money, then maybe we can do a little better, especially around Chapter 70. As you know, last year we passed the education reform, the Students' Opportunity Act. So maybe we can do more for Chapter 70. Maybe we can do more for our towns. Hopefully we don't do less. I don't think we will. I always say that, there are 200 legislators. Each one of us have our own individual priorities when it comes to the state budget, whether it's the environment, whether it's people with mental illness, whether it's people with developmental disabilities, whether it's the sporting, hunting and fishing, and the Department of Conservation and Recreation. We all have our priorities, but one thing we all share are local communities. So local aid is the most important component of our budget every year.
Well, I was going to ask you about the Student Opportunity Act. The city of Fall River was looking to see a pretty hefty increase because of that. Is that sort of right now off the table, and it's just, funding based on 2020 and the inflation?
So the Student Opportunity Act has funding it in the method that we prescribed in the bill, with the 4 buckets of money for low income, for English language learners, for healthcare, and the like. That funding formula is not going to happen this year. However, the city of Fall River has already received about $7 million of direct financial assistance from the feds to their schools. So when the smoke clears, although it won't be under the terms and guidelines of the Student Opportunity Act, Fall River is looking to receive, with what we proposed last week, over $13 million new dollars over FY20. $13 million on top of last year's $11.7 million. So even though the Student Opportunity Act isn't funded, quote unquote, funded per se, with the direct federal money, with us guaranteeing inflation on top of what we funded last year, the city of Fall River is in pretty good shape.
I want to go over a couple of other items that have been on the docket up on Beacon Hill since we last spoke. Of course, the tragic killing of George Floyd has brought up the discussion around police reform. There have been 2 bills, one in each house of the state legislature. Now they're coming together into a conference committee. What's the process of that? And there are some critics that are very supportive of police that are saying that maybe this is something that has been done in haste in some ways, and then maybe there should be a little more deliberation in these talks.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been around long enough, Keith, to know that whenever we pass legislation that increases standards and raises level of accountability, on any profession, be they police officers, be they teachers, be they insurance agents, be they mortgage brokers, be they financial advisors. Whenever you increase standards and increase accountability, there's lots of pushback. Completely understand that. None of these bills, both the House and Senate passed major police reform legislation, all of which were components of various bills. The two of the bills were filed by Governor Baker, one creating the so-called POSAC, the Police Oversight and Standards and Accreditation Commission. You know, Massachusetts is one of only a few states where our police officers are not credentialed. You go through the academy when you're a young police officer, and you never get continuing education in order to keep your job. It's not that way if you're an insurance agent. It's not that way if you're a real estate agent. It's not that way if you're a plumber or electrician or a teacher. You know, you need to have constant training and education to get re-credentialed. That will happen under both versions of the bill. There's also major state police reforms. We saw what happened last year, over the last 2 years, where 18 state police troopers were indicted and charged and found guilty of fraud, of lying on the hours, getting paid for hours they don't work. Guess what? Every single police officer is still on the job. Every single police officer is still getting paid, and every single police officer is still going to get a very good pension when they retire. There's obviously no accountability when it comes to our police officers. So that's something that we wanted to get our hands around. We know how controversial it is. Many of these bills had public hearings over a year ago. There's been lots of debate, lots of discussion about it. Certainly, George Floyd brought it all to the light. When America watched a police officer kneel on a man's neck, and as the man was grasping and gasping for his life, please, I cannot breathe, he knelt there until he killed him. That police officer had 18 prior charges against him for police brutality. And also we watched as 3 other police officers stood around and observed this and did nothing about it. America said, we've got to change that. That, like every profession, including mine in politics, there are good actors and there are bad actors. But unlike my profession, where the bad actors get weeded out every 2 years, that I have to go before the voters every 2 years in order to get reelected and rehired, the bad actors in the law enforcement profession sometimes can just get swept under the rug. They go from department to department. So both the House and the Senate and the governor, all 3, Democrat, Republican, bipartisan, said this has to change. It is now in a conference committee. It will all work out. They always do. I'm an eternal optimist. I know that things get worked out in these conference committees. And at the end of the day, the legislature will pass. The governor will do his thing by either vetoing it or sending it back with an amendment or signing it. And at the end of the day, we will have a police department whom we all love and respect. Remember that my number one priority every year in the budget, number one, is funding police staffing grants. That Fall River has received over $7 million in direct, open-ended checks handed to the city of Fall River for their public safety, for their police and their fire in my tenure as a state senator. More than any other city by far, twice as much as any other city, because it's my number one priority that we need to adequately fund our law enforcement folks. We're not defunding anything. People say, oh, we're not. I increase the funding. But with increased funding, we need increased standards and increased accountability.
A couple of other items to bring up. One that's really local to Fall River. You announced, I believe, about a week or so ago again that the Flint Neighborhood area is going to be receiving $1 million to help improve economic development in that neighborhood. Tell us a little bit more about how that works.
Certainly, it's not a done deal yet, so that's still in conference committee. But so at the end of the session, we passed, both the House and Senate, a number of bond authorizations. And in these bond authorizations, I was able to secure a number of earmarks to direct these bond monies towards particular areas or concerns. One of the areas was the Flint, in and around Pleasant Street. It needs real capital help. And that's what these bond authorizations are. It's not cash. It authorizes the governor, gives him the ability to go out and bond, which means borrow, bond to make capital, which means long-term investments in these areas. And the Flint needs capital investment. It's not all going to be on behalf of the state. We're going to do our share. The city's going to have to do its share. And private investors are going to have to do their share because they'll reap the return on the investment by increased property values and increased ability for the Flint, hopefully someday, to return to the commercial mecca that it was. And I'm happy that I was able to secure that money.
Now, what kind of projects could fall under this bonding?
Roadway improvements, sidewalk improvements, housing improvements, cleaning up brownfields, if there's contaminated areas, cleaning up blight, raising old abandoned buildings. It's not operating money, so it's any sort of investment because we are borrowing this money, so we are paying it back over 25 to 30 years, but it's an expense that will pay dividends for 25 or 30 years. So it's long-term capital investments.
All right. As we wrap up, Senator, you just announced that the legislature is going to be continuing in formal session, if you will, throughout the July 31st traditional deadline. Is it your hope? You're the chair of the Ways and Means Committee, which sort of, pushes all these bills right forward to the Senate floor. Are you hopeful that a lot of the bills that are still up for consideration will get done sooner rather than later, so it doesn't get too close to the election?
It is my strong hope and desire and recommendation to the Senate President that we only take up bills during this time period, which is special and unique for three purposes. One is to pass a budget. All right. We need to pass a budget. We need to put our fiscal house to bed once and for all. We still have to close out fiscal year 20 through a final deficiency budget, and we have to pass a full FY21 budget. One. Two is any sort of COVID emergency related legislation. Back in March, April, and even into May, we passed a number of bills, pieces of legislation that were as a result of this COVID emergency. There are none on the floor. We don't see any in front of us, but you never know what's going to come. And if it's a COVID related emergency, we should go back into session. And last are the conference committees. We have a number of these conference committees, including police reform, including the economic development bond bill. We have the transportation bond bill. We have these conference committees that are still working, that if those conference reports get completed, we should come back into session to do that. Other than that, I'm not looking to complete or to do any other pieces of legislation that did not make the July 31st deadline, because I think at that point we could break the people's trust, knowing that we passed this rule of ending on July 31st on these even number years, election years, to ensure that we're not in lame duck sessions and we don't do crazy things in a lame duck session. And I hope that we fulfill that trust. And briefly, I just want to talk about two important bills of mine that we passed during the last 2 weeks of session, if I may, Keith.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
One is called the Genocide Education Act. I worked very, very closely with BCC's own Professor Ron Weisberger, who heads the Holocaust and Genocide Education Center at Bristol Community College. And it's amazing, if you read a New York Times article from 2018, that 61% of millennials, 41% of all Americans never even heard of Auschwitz. They have no idea how many Jews were killed and massacred during the Holocaust. So what started off as a Holocaust education bill turned into a genocide, because it's not just the Holocaust. The Holocaust is probably the most prominent and the most noteworthy genocide for most, but not for everyone. There's the Armenian genocide. There's our Indian. There's so many Native Americans. There's so many genocides. So we passed the Genocide Education Act. A big shout out to Professor Ron Weisberger on that. I think it's very, very important that we teach our middle and high school students about genocides that have happened around the world throughout history. And the second bill that I've been working on with my good friend and colleague over in the House, Representative Pat Haddad, the Speaker Pro Tem, is something called inclusive concurrent enrollment, allowing those individuals with developmental disabilities, be they Down syndrome, be it autism, whatever the developmental disability is, to allow them to concurrently enroll in some of our higher education classes, whether it's at BCC, which is very much already involved in this program, whether it's at UMass, at Bridgewater State, but to allow them to concurrently enroll up until and beyond the age of 22, when they age out of the IEP process at age 22. An amazing piece of legislation that, if we were not in this COVID emergency and there was another high profile, probably would have gotten a lot more publicity, but something that if you are a parent, if you have a loved one that has a developmental disability, you want to do everything you can to ensure that he or she gains the life skills in order for them to live as most productive life as possible. And this will go a long way to that.
All right. Senator Michael Rodrigues, as always, thank you very much. We'll talk again soon.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Take care.
Stay safe. Thank you. And we want to thank you for joining us as well here at FRC Media. I'm Keith Tebow. Have a great rest of your day.